Hello to everyone joining us tonight. My name is Chantal Henwood, and my pronouns are they and them, and I will be your host tonight. So I want to start off by welcoming you to Digital Intimacies. It's an event that is part of SEXtember. SEXtember is an event that has been created by the health promotions team at UNSW and is designed to encourage you to question, explore, and learn about the intricacies about intimate lives and the challenges, triumphs, and experiences of people from many different intersections of the UNSW community and beyond. However, we could not discuss these themes without first acknowledging that SEXtember was created on stolen land, and tonight we are signing in from various places that have been the birthplace of culture, knowledge, and storytelling for millennia. Tonight, I acknowledge that UNSW campuses reside on the unceded territory of the Bejugal, Gadigal, and Nwangul peoples, who are the traditional owners of the lands where each campus of UNSW is situated. Tonight, I am coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I encourage you to share in the chat where you are joining us from so that we can all partake in this acknowledgement. We show our respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of the lands that we reside. We show our respect to the Indigenous guests who may be joining us tonight and to their elders past, present, and emerging for the care of these lands over countless generations, for the continued leadership and contribution to the tens of thousands of years of knowledge that continues to nourish our communities, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be. Before we get started for tonight and I introduce my panel, I'd like to give thanks to our SEXtember sponsors that made this event possible. We're grateful to have Pleasure Base, a sponsor supporting SEXtember and tonight's event. Pleasure Base exists to stamp out negative stigma surrounding pleasure and to help people of every age, gender, and orientation make the most of their sexual experience. Of course, I'd also like to thank our UNSW and health promotions team, who have been working hard to bring this festival to life. This year is the first year the festival is held completely online, but also the first year that it's been open to the public. The past couple of years, our health has been focused on COVID-19. And while we still need to remain vigilant in protecting ourselves and the community, I'm really grateful that we get to take a moment to acknowledge other important parts of our lives, from mental health, sexual health, relationships, and community. Closed captions are enabled for our discussion tonight, and we encourage you all to submit your own questions for the panel via a chat or Q&A function. And I'd also like to thank our guests who submitted their questions upon registration, and we'll be working through them tonight. Tonight, we are joined by 4 impressive and insightful panelists who are here to discuss some of the social, psychological, and biological impacts that the digital sphere is having on our intimate lives, from dating apps, artificial intelligence, community guidelines, and yes, even sex robots. We'll be answering your questions and pondering on just what the future holds for us as we begin to emerge from a global pandemic that saw us experience intense isolation and a sharp shift of living our lives through a screen. Our first panelist is Ash King, a provisional psychologist and psychology researcher at the University of Sydney's Cyber Psychology Research Group, currently completing her PhD on online self-presentation and authenticity. Ash is dedicated to helping people and has worked across a range of creative fields, including running workshops with Amazon, Pinterest, Support Act, and Big Sound 2020. You can participate in Ash's PhD research by following the link in our chat to complete the survey. Dr. Don Silence is a current UNSW lecturer in media communications and is currently coming up on his 20-year anniversary as a teacher. An award-winning scholar and digital literacies, Don's classes are also incredibly popular at UNSW, so do keep an eye out on his name on any of the courses that you might be taking in the arts sector. Robert Brooks is an evolutionary biologist who studies the evolutionary consequences of sex. His first book, Sex, Genes, and Rock and Roll, How Evolution Has Shaped the Modern World, won the 2012 Queensland Literary Award for Science. And his latest book, which I have here is titled Artificial Intimacy and provides a fresh and original view of the very near future of human relationships. Last but certainly not least, Jenna Love is a full-service sex worker, porn creator, and advocate for sex worker rights. She's an expert at breaching community guidelines, disappointing her parents, and banging people who vote against her rights. She has worked in the sex industry for nearly a decade and considers herself a career whore who is currently the secretary of Scarlet Alliance and Australian Sex Workers Association. Jenna also has a great podcast, which I listen to frequently, called Somebody You Love, created by with fellow sex worker Holly Hart, which aims to destigmatize sex work and provides an insight into ethical engagement within sex worker services. So tonight we'll be discussing a range of topics, and I will be opening up the discussion with the idea of integrated technology. So currently, our world is functioning frequently through mobile phones, TV, laptops. We seem to live on a continuous Zoom meeting. Are we currently setting young people up to be antisocial and isolated, or has this technology allowed us to create more meaningful connections, made through those connections making them more accessible and diverse? Rob, what do you think about this?
I think it's a really tough one. I think that it's the kind of question that really needs, really solid empirical evidence. Often, if you ask people the question or something like it, you'll often find that sort of reflexive answers reflect, how they feel about technology and how they feel about young people, etc. There's a lot of doom and gloom about what's happened recently, and there's a little bit of optimism. I think our crowd here tonight has probably, got more than the representative amount of optimism. One of the things that the new technologies do is they allow us to connect in a way that's not constrained to the people that we would bump into. When I was at uni and you wanted to have a relationship or you wanted to have sex, you basically had to meet people at parties or in class, and that's weird. I mean, even my children look at me and go, that's really odd that you would, couple up with people in your classes and stuff like that. And so I think, with reservation. But now it's in a way so much more clinical, and you can connect with people that you would never encounter in your social circles or your geographic circles. And so, there's a huge win right up front. Downside, of course, as machine learning gets involved in these technologies and platforms, it gets very good at delivering to us what the machine learning algorithms owners want, and that is largely to keep us on platform, which cuts into our sleep and cuts into our time for loving and befriending and having sex and having families and family relationships. And so, pluses and minuses, and I could go on all night and it wouldn't be a very interesting panel discussion just listing them. But I think that I'm agnostic.
Don, you teach and study in the field of digital media and technology, and have been teaching throughout the pandemic online. What is your opinion and experience through that process?
Thanks, Chantal. To be honest, teaching online is garbage, and I hate it very much. There's nothing like doing things in person, in my experience. But I would say that when you take the long historical view, this is the first generation. We are the first, we are the literal pioneers, the first generation of people growing up with the internet, growing up with it as a tool, as a means of communication, as a backdrop for all of our experiences. So we're still trying to apply pre-internet thinking to the whole new world. And I was reminded actually of, we're going through one thing with lockdown, Chantal, but there's a whole other thing that is moving inexorably in a completely different direction, that I think is opening up aspects of human sexuality that we just would never have understood or thought desirable or possible. Anyway, I was just going to say, I guess you guys probably know about this, but anyway, sex workers on Animal Crossing, you guys know that during lockdown? See, some of you know. Right. It was just that, like people who could not make those connections in real life started creating them in a virtual environment. And I do think that is probably the direction that we're seeing. But I would be interested to hear what Jenna or Ash had to say.
Yeah, I mean, Jenna, you completely changed the way that you operate through this process. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience and some of the, I guess, unexpected encounters and things that, clients were desiring?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think for me, pre-pandemic, in that crazy pre-times that we vaguely remember, I had no interest in offering online services as such. So I was creating porn where I would create something and push it out there, but there wasn't that direct one-to-one with the client kind of experience. And I had no interest in that. I had people from overseas saying, oh, could we do a Skype call or that sort of thing? And I was like, ew, no. Because for me, one of the reasons I'm a sex worker is because I love being with people. I love touching people. I love intimacy and sex. So I thought, no, I'm not going to do that through a computer screen. And then obviously the pandemic hit and I suddenly had 80% of my income pulled out from underneath me. And I went, okay, well, I guess we're going to pivot. And I started offering a range of services. And the things that have been popular in that were not necessarily what I would have expected. So one aspect is that I offer video calls, and I offer social video calls as well as sexy fun time strip show kind of video calls. And interestingly, I've had far more of the social video calls. They are a little bit cheaper, so that might be a factor. But what I've found is, in terms of this question of, is the technology bringing us further together or isolating us more, I've actually been introduced to a whole kind of customer base of people who found the idea of actually making a booking and turning up and being with a sex worker in the same room, because I don't know, we're intimidating apparently. That's quite a full-on experience, and it is. I mean, it's quite full on to open the door and be like, all right, guess we're going to bang now. So they've found that a really great stepping stone to actually be able to just talk to a sex worker, even though there's so many of us and we exist everywhere. So few people actually have had a conversation with somebody that they know is a sex worker. So I've had a lot of people who have gone, oh, I've been admiring you for a while from a distance or whatever. But the thought of actually making a booking was really intimidating. So to have even a 15-minute, half an hour chat is a really great stepping stone for them. And then it means that when it does come to that point of where we hopefully are able to, or they want to bring it into a physical space, it's just that much easier. So yeah, that's been actually really great.
And Ash, I mean, you research psychology and studying that kind of digital sphere and its impacts on our mental health and things like that. Do you find what Jenna is saying surprising? Or
I mean, Jenna basically spoke about the way that people are accessing mental health services at the moment too. People hold themselves back because they're scared of sitting in a room with someone who's going to ask them about their trauma and their deep dark secrets. And people feel intimidated by that process with the same sort of fears and apprehensions. So the fact that people can, whack open a screen or get their phone up and be connected with a psychotherapist, with a psychologist, it just makes it a lot more, I guess, gentle and also accessible during this time, having someone to talk to, having someone to connect with. All of my client work has been online, so I haven't been seeing clients face to face, and if we didn't have the internet, that wouldn't be an option. So I'm really grateful, and I think that yes, we can really get sucked into the scaremongering of we're all going to lose our minds, we're all going to be disconnected and live in our little bubbles, our little tech bubbles. But I mean, Rob said it perfectly. There needs to be a sense of balance when we're having these conversations. Of course, there are downsides. There are downsides to everything, especially anything that has as big an impact as technology is having on all our lives now. But we also kind of need to balance it out with, okay, what's it offering us too? And that's important.
Yeah, I mean, we're about to move into this transition phase as well, as we're kind of slowly coming out of a hard lockdown period, I, for one, have noticed that I get really exhausted and really tired after a face-to-face social interaction with people. So as we kind of move from this, highly dependent digital interaction, what do you think are some of the challenges that we're going to face from a social, psychological, many different ways in which this can kind of impact us, even from a physical sense of that lethargy and the brain fog and things like that? Ash, do you want to carry on with what you were saying?
Look, I mean, I would say that, I can't say that I am familiar with sort of any data or research that would suggest that would be the case. I mean, yes, I think that all of us are going to be re-emerging from lockdown with a lot of fatigue. The last 18 months have been a lot for a lot of us. And yes, it might take a little bit of time for us to readjust and see how life looks and feels, to see how our social relationships, our romantic relationships have shifted over this time. But I think that it's also important for us to recognize the importance of mindset and, not necessarily going, well, this is going to be really hard and it's going to be so exhausting seeing people face to face again and I'm going to be so drained. We're wired for connection, and seeing people is also a great way to help fill our cups up, whether that's in a social capacity, in a romantic capacity, in a sexual capacity. So these are all things that we need as human beings. And I think that, yes, while things might be hard, I think a lot of other things are going to be really great.
I mean, Don, you experienced quite adamantly your distaste for online learning. I bet you're excited to get back into the classroom. Do you have any expectations of maybe some of the challenges that students might face as well?
I think we've already seen it, because we already went through one lockdown and then we went back a little bit and people were hesitant and, distance, creating extra distance between themselves. I think, I think we will get back to where we want to be. But that said, I think it's been an interesting and arguably valuable test case for some of the kinds of changes we will see as a result of the impact of the internet on human beings, which is that we're open to the idea that we can have real relationships online. We're open to the idea that we can have intimate connections online. In fact, for years, Chantal, I get into fights with students. I'm that kind of teacher. Because they would say, well, like, it's just stuff that happens online. It's not IRL. I'm like, no, it's all IRL. Everything you do is your real life, and the impact of the things that we do online, our fantasies and our desires, they are meaningful. They're meaningful to our lives. And I think we're much more aware of that now. Having lived through what it might look like to have those kinds of relationships change, which isn't, to say I'm too old. It's like, not for me. I want to do everything in person. But, I think younger people might have different feelings.
I guess this also really brings it into that idea of what happens online is just online. It brings into a topic that we did want to discuss tonight about how the things that happen in our digital space have real world implications, and that we do have sets of regulations and community guidelines that happen on the apps and the websites that we operate in. And there's also kind of like cultural rules and regulations that maybe aren't fully formed like our legal ones are in our physical world. But they all have ramifications outside because we are living in the physical world. So what are some of these impacts that you have experienced personally or realized in your research? Who do they affect? How do they affect us? And what can we do to kind of like mitigate damage or be aware of some of these challenges that are coming up with these community guidelines? I'm going to pass this to Jenna.
Yes, I have many things to say on the subject. So, of course, look, one of the groups that is very much affected by this is sex workers, but we often describe ourselves in these sorts of conversations as the canaries down the coal mine, because, the stuff that we deal with, it starts with us, and then We see lingerie companies being affected. We see sex education companies being affected. And eventually we see people expressing their own sexuality and engaging with other people in some sort of intimate way being affected. So it does have much broader implications than that. But a super recent example is that I lost my Instagram a week or two ago. That was my third Instagram account. I had not broken any community guidelines. We're very aware of them as sex workers. We know that we're kind of easily targeted. And sure, the stuff I post is, titillating, but it's nowhere near as graphic as what you see from some celebrities and things like that. And I lost that account. And I think there may be this perception from the outside that with deplatforming, all we're doing is, it's just a social media account. It doesn't have that much value, but sort of like Don was saying, it has so much real world value, because not only do sex workers use the internet to advertise, if they are in-person sex workers, they also use it, of course, to make money if we're doing online content work. But almost arguably more important than that is that we use the internet to connect and to share safety information and to keep ourselves safe. And a lot of that stuff is very private. And so people outside of the industry may not be aware of it. And that's very intentional. But when we lose social media accounts, and when we have groups that we've created deleted, we lose access. Our job is, I work on my own. I don't have an office place, it's just me and a client most of the time. So I lose all of my connections to the industry. I, had to send Chantel an email saying, we had been conversing about this via Instagram, because Instagram it's not just a fun little frivolous thing where you post photos of your food. It can be that. But for a lot of us, we are running businesses. We are managing our lives through social media. So I suddenly had to send Chantel an email and say, by the way, I'm here on my backup account, because you'll never meet a sex worker who doesn't have 40 different backup accounts on every platform, because I'd lost that communication and I'd lost connection with so many of my channels. And we have groups where we share safety information that has to be very private. You have to be sort of verified to join. And these platforms just delete them under the guise of breaching community guidelines or whatever it is, even though it's a private space and everybody that's been included, has been vetted. The platform says, no, too much sexy talk. And often it's people discussing being victims of things that other people have perpetrated, but because we're discussing those, bad things, they get wiped out and years of safety information is gone. And considering the fact that so much of the laws that affect in-person sex work, so on a state and a local level in Australia, there's a lot of laws that prohibit what they will call soliciting, street-based sex work, and brothel work. So in New South Wales, the sex industry is decriminalised. It's pretty good, but it's still, there are some aspects of street-based work and brothels that are criminalised and that can't go ahead. And in a lot of other states and territories, they're completely illegal. So we've got this push from the state and local government level saying we need you off the streets, essentially. And then we've got this push from the international and federal level saying we also need to get you off the internet. So they're sort of slamming us together, and I think that the antis go, that's good, the sex workers will just go away, we just magically won't have to deal with it. But as we all know, whether or not you agree that it's the oldest profession or not, regardless, it's been around for a long time. It needs to continue to exist. We need to have jobs that exist that do not have a high barrier to entry. We need to have, sex work historically is so crucial to women being able to get out of domestic violence situations, to the queer community being able to find employment, because in a lot of normal jobs that's not that easy. So we need sex work, and it's going to happen whether we like it or not. Obviously I like it, and I understand people don't, but pushing us off the internet and then pushing us off the streets, just all of those things just put us more in danger.
Ash, you're also studying things like presentation and authenticity on on the internet, when so much of our, I guess, identity is also wrapped up within our digital sphere? What are some of the kind of like psychological implications when either we are, as Jenna's experience, deplatformed, or even some of the things in terms of representation, access to community, even things like online bullying and things like that? What's your understanding of that?
So that's a really big and broad area. And a friend of mine is actually a researcher in that space over in the UK, and she researches shadow banning, cyberbullying, and she recently got deplatformed and had her Instagram ripped off because they were like, well, she's also a pole dance instructor. And I spent a number of years working in the pole dance industry and teaching and creating marketing, and we experienced a lot of, stuff that similar to what Jenna said, it just all getting ripped down. You can't boost ads, all this stuff, because they're like, no, this is not the content that is allowed on the internet. And it's like, really? Yeah, I saw like the photo that was on the front cover of this magazine that seems to be everywhere. So I don't know. But I mean, one thing that I know through my research is that authenticity is something that when we engage with our sense of authenticity, when we get real online, when we can be honest about ourselves and our experiences, that it is really good for our mental health. As human beings, we love to be witnessed, and we love to be witnessed in our fullness, I guess. And I think that people are starting to become a little bit more comfortable showing up online, not only as this sort of perfect and polished self, but also coming clean with some, difficulties that they've been through, some challenges that have occurred. And so I do think that being able to be authentic is really important. And I guess from, like a personal standpoint, I'm a psychologist and a mental health practitioner. But, during lockdown, because I also used to work in pole dance, I was teaching sort of chair and lap dancing classes online. And I remember someone saying, like, maybe you shouldn't, do that on your Instagram, because what are people going to think about you being a psychologist and doing that? It's like, babe, I don't want to have to only show a slice of who I am. When I show up online, I want to be able to say that as a human being, I'm multifaceted. I have a range of interests. I just don't fit in one type of a box, or the sort of box that you think is what mental health practitioners or psychologists are like. Psychologists are human beings, just like anyone, just like sex workers, like this is the thing. The same with academics too. So it's kind of like, if you want to be an academic, maybe you shouldn't be putting up your pole dancing videos on the internet. So there's like a whole lot of stuff there. But I think it's just really interesting to reflect on how, we, still a lot of us think that there should be a way that we partition ourselves online, online, I should say. And from what the sort of emerging research is, because it's in early days, but showing that when we can be authentic, when we can show up online honestly and authentically, it does seem to be a lot better for us, our sense of self, identity, and mental health.
Yeah, there's such great points. I think as well, there's this kind of idea of like performative authenticity within online spaces as well. So being able to find that balance between really showing up as yourself because it's how you want to be, I think is also really vital to people's mental health. So I mean, you brought up academia, which I think, Rob, you study sex and work closely with the sex lab at UNSW. And I know historically, the idea of studying sex has been quite, I guess, looked down upon in terms of academia, and historically people used to write under different names when conducting research, and things were done in secret. How have you seen a shift in terms of researching into sex and sexuality and all sorts of things like that? Have you seen a big change over the years in terms of attitudes?
Of course. Yes and no. And I think that the changes are more the ones that I'm worried about, and I don't really know how much to worry about them. But to begin with, so I've said to my grad students about 15 years ago, what are we going to call this lab? I don't normally would call it the Brooks lab, which is very, hierarchical. And I said, what do you think of the sex lab? And they were all behind it. And I think if you're going to call your lab the sex lab, and if you're going to work on sex in academic spaces, of course, not everybody's going to get that first time round. So you just have to make sure that you, don't make the jokes that normal people would be making, in the course of events. Or, I've had so many media interviews where they just want to be like, animals have sex. Isn't that a bit funny? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And if you can play really straight to that kind of stuff, you can get away with calling your lab the sex lab. I guess I'll tell you a story about the Vice Chancellor of our university, because I think it shows him in quite good light. But he's an obstetric surgeon, and gynecological surgeon. So there's another profession where you just don't make kind of anatomical jokes, etc. And this if you're that kind of surgeon, or you should at least. Etc. Anyway, we were at a very, very big event, and for a program that I was running, I was the MC of this event. I had trained up a bunch of speakers to give kind of TED Talks, etc. And the Vice Chancellor came to me just beforehand. He said, what should I say about you? It's a fun event, it was a bunch of Vice Chancellors from around the world. So it was a fun event, but kind of high-powered. And I said, just say that I sit in my office and I think about sex. So he's like, oh, that's hilarious. And he said this, and everybody laughed, etc. And then I got up and said, thank you. Oh, and he had dinged his glass, and I have never told this joke in public before, but anyway, and so then I got up and I said, Vice Chancellor, I had no idea that you played an instrument. And of course, he and I are both on the straight and narrow with this whole thing, and everybody else in the room is all getting all seedy with their thinking about, what it was that we were saying, and they all took it as a masturbation joke. And people were like, you're going to get fired tomorrow, etc. But the people who mattered, I think, saw that even with, calling your lab the sex lab and saying you sit in your office and think about sex doesn't have to be a scandalous thing. It's a very normal thing. We study where people come from, where babies come from, the diseases that people suffer from as a consequence of whatever type of genital kind of plumbing they have. And all of these things are things that we should be really straight about. Unfortunately, it's really complicated, and the politics surrounding sex and gender and sexuality and the sex that people are having, and the sex that other people are not having, and all of the issues that propel things like what Jenna was speaking about, where you've got these sort of puritanical impulses to really clamp down on sex, and often to do it under sort of various Trojan horse guises, all of that stuff. It's, we've been arguing about this stuff at least since the 80s with pornography, at least since ancient Rome, actually. And we're going to continue arguing about this stuff forever and ever. Right now, it's flaring up in all sorts of interesting ways that, if you work on sex and you talk about things, and maybe if you make a joke about the Vice Chancellor on a Zoom meeting, sooner or later, you're going to get cancelled, I reckon. So I just want to get close enough to retirement and have a clear conscience that when, whoever it is comes for me, and if they happen to win, I'll know that I've acted authentically, as Ash might say. But yeah, look, God, not everybody likes sex. Everybody who likes sex likes sex. And, even the people who are waging campaigns against freewheeling, easygoing sexuality, or against sex work, or, on various other fronts, they probably also secretly like sex, and hopefully we can reach a few of them and get them to just relax a little bit. And I think that the technologies are probably going to help us get there.
Great answer. That's incredible. Don, did you have something to bounce off as well?
Sorry, guys. I just wanted to just sort of follow up on everyone's position. I don't know the Vice Chancellor well enough to make sex jokes about him, but anyway. And I got to say, Robert, academics will study anything. Sex is terribly important, but you know what academics are like, honestly. I was just going to say, in terms of deplatforming, and I don't know what everyone's specific personal experience was. Unfortunately, a lot of it is actually done at an algorithmic level. So when people get zucked, when they get canceled, they don't even know why. And a lot of it is just flagging. It's just the algorithm saying, well, actually, that looks like a thing that is a problem. And then you have to go, there's a tedious review process. And you know what I mean? Like, and then finally a human will get involved, maybe too late. And I think the reason actually is unfortunately legal. So the problem is that there aren't really good laws that govern the internet. We built this thing without ever really considering what kind of impact it would have. There you go. We just didn't know. I'm always reminded of the story of, when cars were first invented and the speed limits that were introduced around cars were no faster than a person could walk, because a person would have to walk in front of the car going, look out, a car is coming. We didn't do that with the internet. We had no idea how fast it would move. And there just aren't good laws that govern the internet. So most laws about it tend to be about 5 or 10 years behind anything that's actually happening on it. In terms of deplatforming, I would say the other aspect of Jenna's experience that I'd want to address would be that one of the things that is problematic and harmful would be the tens of millions of human slaves that exist in the world that are trafficked via the internet. 2/3 of all the money that is made from human slavery in the contemporary period is sex. It's sex exploitation, and roughly 70% of that is women and girls, which has nothing to do with the legal sex trade, sex workers, anything like that. That is just commercial sexual exploitation. And because it is happening online, because a lot of it is organized or directed, like a lot of it is people accessing these services are literally doing it online. They're just actually not good laws for this, partly because we don't really, I know people talk about international law a lot. We don't really have international laws. We just have international agreements and local laws that apply. And we just didn't build them for the internet. I think partly because, well, we don't really have informed consent. I'm not making a joke here. When Google takes our data and they do stuff with it, when Facebook takes our data and they do stuff, we don't really know how that works, and we don't really have any say. And that is generally true for most of the things that happen on the internet, is most people don't know how it works. Well, it got dark all of a sudden. Sorry. I'm sure there's something positive. Hold on.
I think as well, and also Jenna, you're more than welcome to speak on this, but everything you just said, Don, really points towards the fact that like bringing sex workers out of the stigmatized area of work and into a more like it is work, they deserve rights and a union and things like that should really combat those kind of issues of trafficking and
sure.
And
I think what all, yeah, absolutely. Well, it's what Jenna and Ash and Robert were all saying. There's this kind of positivity to sex, and then there's a lot of historically criticism and negativity and keeping things in the dark and not talking about how they actually work. And that actually does drive sex work underground and results in this kind of exploitation. So we've got to at least have serious adult conversations about human sexuality. Otherwise, we are basically just endorsing human slavery, which is not okay.
I mean, I haven't heard the statistic about percentage of wealth that comes out of the sexual component of modern slavery. But there are, according to at least the International Labour Office's 2017 publication on global estimates of modern slavery, the percentage of people involved that are victims of modern slavery they estimate that there are 3.8 million adults who are victims of forced sexual exploitation, which is obviously a horrific number. But the amount of adults estimated to be in non-sexual forced labor is 16 million. So the percentage of people, like while sexual exploitation is fucked, and we do absolutely agree, have to have serious conversations about it that aren't about just, oh, let's hope it goes away. I would argue that that it is more of a labor issue than a sex issue, I guess.
Yeah, I think my general argument was that slavery was terrible, and it blows
Totally.
my mind. It blows my mind that there are more slaves in the world today than there have ever been before in human history. Of course, that's just a measure of population. I don't think.
But it's still an alarming figure, right?
They're all bad. There's no good news there. But the good news is talking about actually helps, and talking about why we don't seem to be able to do anything about it helps.
And I think there's one other thing that we should talk about with this issue when it comes to the slavery question, which is often used as a Trojan horse against sex work and as against a sexualized internet. Despite the realities, the very uncomfortable realities of what does happen, is that what's propelling people is not necessarily first and foremost the slavery. It's often used as a very important, as a very compelling argument, but it's often just the sex. Just like in America, what's upsetting people about abortion is not the termination of pregnancies or the loss of life, it's the sex. And it's particularly the fact that poorer, younger women just are using their one form of agency that they have, and it's an attempt to shut that down. At least with the abortion issue. Maybe we should stick to the abortion issue because it's less contentious at the moment in Australia. But that's certainly the way that I would see it. And so we do need to have that conversation about the sex and just somehow get across the notion that the sex isn't all that threatening in the end. It's not such a bad thing.
The Trojan horse is bang on, because if we look at FOSTA-SESTA, which was brought in 2018, which is the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act and the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act, both in the US. Of course, they're US laws, but they affect all of us because the internet, half of it exists in the US. And similarly, there's some stuff arguably around the online safety bill, which just came in Australia. And those things were brought in and approved under the guise of essentially protecting women and children. And the question I have is which women and children, because it's not the women who are earning a wage from sex work. It's not the children of people who are earning a wage from sex work. And it is certainly not women and children who are actually affected by sex trafficking, because it is that, as you said, it's the pushing it underground, and that isn't helping anybody. And there have been certified deaths as a result of those laws.
So that legislation creates the one big issue that's really going to define where all of this stuff goes. And that is, do we have an open internet with all the crap that brings and all the nastiness and horror that brings? Or do we have an internet that is like some kind of 1950s Murdoch newspaper? Because that's really the alternative that you have.
I'm going to throw in a question from one of our guests. So the question is, do you think it is a genuinely Puritan approach that caused people to be verbally, whether in conversation or discussion making, against sex work and porn, or whether it's the idea that potentially being perceived negatively by others that scares them? Do you think people would be more open about it if they were able to be anonymous in their support, or at least not be doing so in public spaces? So I guess we can kind of talk about how can one support privately, and is there validity or benefits to supporting privately, and how can you support sex workers more in their fight for rights and legislation and protection?
Big question. I guess I'll field this one. Yes, there is absolutely value in supporting it privately. There are so many people who do that. There is that hypocrisy I talk about, a part of my job being banging the people who vote against my rights. And that I'm obviously not really okay with. But that being said, I have so many clients who are incredibly supportive and do support anonymously, will sign on to things and all of that anonymously. But that, it's the stigma and the discrimination that stops that from getting out. And that isn't just a sex work thing. That applies to everyone, to the whole sex conversation. There's just so much stigma about it. And that gets in the way. So, I would never ask somebody to sort of out themselves or anything like that. A big part of the issue we face is that the vast majority of sex workers are not out. will not show their face. I mean, the fact that I show my face in my advertising means that I can never enter the USA. That's for certain, but there's a whole bunch of other countries that I probably can never enter either. So that's a huge step to be asking people to say, put your face out, say that you're a sex worker. I'm cisgendered, I'm white, I have a husband, so I present a really heteronormative kind of vibe, Most sex workers don't have that. People that come from backgrounds or that come from other countries where there's a lot more Puritanism and a lot of cultural stuff around sex, they're not in a position to be able to put their faces out there. So I don't, a big part of it is the negative perception. But I think the other thing, which sort of hasn't really been covered by this question, is this push to paint us as victims. And that comes with language. It's one of the big reasons why we try not to use the P word, which I guess I'm about to say the P word. Anyone who's not comfortable with it, close your ears, but that's prostitution. That really suggests a lack of agency. And you hear prostituted women, which of course is an issue because it's very heteronormative and all of that as well. But yeah, I think there's a big push. The anti-trafficking lobby is arguably one of the most difficult things that we have to face, because anybody who is perceived to be anti-trafficking gets perceived to be pro-trafficking, which of course we are not, as we've covered. No one in this space is. In terms of helping and getting involved, I would direct you to Scarlet Alliance. I did pop a link in the chat. Scarlet Alliance, we have member organisations all over the country. They're all peer orgs. Everybody involved at every level is a sex worker. And we work incredibly closely with lawmakers. We're funded by the Department of Health. And, we do a lot of work in that space, and we can always do with donations, and even just following us on social media and sharing and all that sort of stuff is incredibly valuable.
They do initiatives as well of sharing bills that are coming up, break them down into really easily digestible ways so that you can understand how they're going to impact people. And quite often they don't just impact sex workers, they impact people from a really wide range of backgrounds. So I do really encourage everyone to support them. So I have two questions that I'm going to combine here. So we have a previously submitted question about dating apps. So dating apps have had their highest user base during the pandemic, with people unable to make connections out and about. How do you think the dating industry will change after the pandemic and into the future? And where do you think it's heading? And I'm just going to join that with a question from Josh, who is just wondering, they've had some matches in the past, only had about 4 meaningful longer term relationships. They found that women on dating apps are far, in all capitals, more willing to ignore and ghost me than in real life. Is this a reflection on my perhaps old-fashioned dating ways, or reflections on the failing of online dating apps? And what are the panelists' thoughts? I thought I might join those together. I think we can probably answer them in conjunction with each other. Ash, do you want to start off with this one?
Yeah, sure. I actually dived into some cyber-psych research in regards to the future of dating apps. And I'll speak to a couple that are coming out that are on the horizon at the moment that sounded pretty interesting. So there's one called Nayana, and it's actually designed to predict a person's 7-year romantic outlook, right? So the designer says that the real challenge is sociological modeling. For example, a person who has been in one location for 5 years will have fewer opportunities to meet people than someone who just moved there. And an extrovert will likely meet more people than an introvert. So I was like, wow, that's super fascinating. And then there's another one called The Grade, which holds users accountable for their dating behaviors, giving them letter grades from A through to F that other people can view. So users are given a warning and suggestions for improvement if their grade drops to a D or an F, and those who ignore the warnings get kicked out. So, maybe that's that app's answer to ghosting issues, like they're just getting the boot, they're not welcome on the app anymore. So I thought this was quite an interesting direction to be seeing dating apps moving in.
I have another question just to throw in there. The idea of ghosting and things like that, I find really interesting with dating apps, because we observe, take in, and swipe, and then match with a huge range of people. And it's interesting to think about the ideas of obligation towards a match. What do we think is kind of, in terms of like, what do we owe people that we match with on dating apps? Similar to like, what are our expectations of, should you text someone after you go on your first date, of setting the thing of like, there just wasn't a spark, thank you for your time, or would you rather just not hear from them? Those sort of things, because I think there's definitely this, dating apps have turned our dating and relationships in this kind of like reciprocal give and take, like we swipe, we match, we talk, we date, something happens. What do you think on that? What are our obligations to people when it comes to dating nowadays, and how has that changed?
Sorry, are you asking? Oh, you asked Robert? Sorry, go on, Robert.
Anyone can go. I'm just throwing that in there.
You go, Don. You sound like you're more ready to answer this one.
Well, I'm just saying that it's probably generational. Do you know what I mean? So the way we all feel may not be the way our children or our grandchildren or our great-great-grandchildren feel about utilizing technology. And to be honest, there's some chatter in the chat there. Sometimes women are just like, I actually don't want to face you anymore, and I'm done. You know what I mean? And I think that increasingly people feel okay with ghosting. We have a term for it now, but the idea that you make these transitory connections and maybe it's not a lifelong thing might actually just be an extension of how the technology works for us. In the past, people weren't going to go through 10,000 people to find the person that they wanted to be with. Now you have these different options there. Surely they're going to shape our understanding of how relationships should work. We're very attached to monogamy. We're very attached to heterosexuality. Sorry, guys, but you know what I mean? We're very attached to it. Well, I'm just saying, like, culturally speaking, and there's no reason to think that that's necessarily going to continue. But what I would say to that person, a student who I do know, actually, hey, how you doing? I'm just saying, is that there's probably no real anonymity on the net. I mean, there's just records of everything that we do. Humans don't look at them. I'm just saying that they're just ones and zeros, and they do end up being recorded. And it's probably something that we need to think about, that living out in the open eventually is going to change our behavior. We're going to be open about a lot of things. And we're just, I think, maybe also going to be decisive, I think, than just say, well, this is what I really believe. This is what I really stand for. This is what I'm going to do because I know that, you know what I mean? And our relationship with non-human agents is probably a big part of the thinking in future technology. I know we're running out of time. Did we want to talk about sex robots, Chantal? There was a question, and I really want to hear Jenna, Ash, or Robert talk about what do sex workers think about VR and robotics.
Yeah,
that's why I came, guys. I came so I could hear you guys talk about.
No, I thought you were going to talk about this.
Well, I am, but I just wanted to hear your opinion.
Well, I will quickly say that I don't believe sex workers are not afraid of VR and robotics. I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. I think that that's wonderful. I think we should be constantly exploring new ways to express our sexuality and connect with people, or whatever it is that we're connecting with, ourselves maybe. But I don't think that humans will ever get rid of the need for intimacy with another human being, and that doesn't necessarily mean sex. But I think that will always be there. I've been asked by a number of media outlets, are you worried that robot brothels are going to put you out of a job? And no, I'm not. If there's a robot brothel, I'm going there. That sounds fucking ace. I'm giving that a go. But at the end of the day, if people, just want to have an orgasm, they're not going to go to the effort and the cost and the time to book a sex worker. We can all find ways of orgasming. Well, maybe not all of us, but there's lots of different ways of doing it. But the key to sex work, even though sex is what's in the title, is intimacy, connection, feeling safe, feeling heard, and just interaction with other humans. And I think that's a constant throughout humanity.
I'm a bit worried, Jenna, in response to that, though, because that sort of relies on the tech never being quite that good, you know? And I think that every time we say the tech's not going to be that good, it won't be able to do this, it won't be able to do that. First of all, I think, even, porn, sex toys, etc., already, distract people. Time they spend using them is not time they're not spending having sex or going to sex workers, etc. But what the thing that concerns me most with respect to sex work and VR and sex robots, and there are many things that I think are great about the tech, and there are many things that I think are worth worrying about. The one that I imagine sex workers may worry about is, what if a bunch of 10 dude bros in California invent such a compelling device that sex work then suddenly becomes legal because it's hugely corporate profitable, and that squeezes real people out of this market for which individual agency is such an important part. Now that's a hell of a long way down the track, but it is one of those things I'd want to keep my eye on. There's lots of others that I won't pick up all the last 5 minutes. So.
Yeah, great points.
I was just going to say, Robert, very quickly, I think it's unlikely to happen in our lifetime with the technological developments up. Jenna, for what it's worth, there is a robot brothel in China. The Chinese are actually...
Yeah, but it's not here, is it?
No, A, it's not here. B, it's not very good. If you've seen it, it's some disembodied bits of robot that you can have sex with. It does not seem hard at all. Doesn't feel great. But there have not been major advances in sex robotics, I'm afraid.
That's a good point, looking very, very far down the track.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I just don't think our lifetime is it, for what it's worth. But I think it's really interesting that we're all talking about something that isn't happening, because I think it does raise really interesting questions about consent, which is obviously a big part of the thinking of where we really are up to as a society, is that we are very interested in talking about sexuality in terms of consent, and robots are a good metaphor for that.
It definitely poses the question of, can you consent if you're programmed to consent?
Right, which is I think there's also probably a big argument about rape culture or something like that, and women being programmed to consent. I noticed in the chat here, it's from Lily. It says, on Alana's point, women and non-binary people often feel safer to ignore someone online than they do. And there's a number of comments here from people saying, well, what if are people obligated to behave in particular ways? I think this is where the conversation's at, although I'm very aware that we've run out of time to have it.
We are able to go a little bit over time. If everyone's comfortable to stay on for a little bit longer, no one has anywhere to go, and guests are welcome to stay on. If anyone has any last minute questions, I do have 2 more for everyone. Basically, we've talked about online dating and sex robots and things like that. There is a question submitted from someone wondering, how can we make meaningful connections and relationships when we do navigate them predominantly online? Do you think that it is possible, especially in those initial kind of bonding moments, it does really have a physiological kind of response in terms of touch and smell and bonding and things like that? Rob, do you want to touch on this?
Can do. I think person to person, when you're dealing with the human mind, there's always going to be something missing with the online stuff, but I think we're going to get better at it. I think the prospect of virtual reality sex with haptics, etc., where you're actually hooking up with someone or someone's or many someone's with compatible software and hardware of your choice, and just going for it, I think is obviously that's what quantum computers are basically going to be for, because we'll need a lot more bandwidth. And I think that's really exciting. But I think it's always, because we've evolved to interact human to human, there'll always be something that's a little bit missing. What I think scares me is where machine learning learns how to make us feel what the machine learning algorithms want us to feel. I think they're going to find entirely new ways. Just like ASMR, I don't know if you ever listen to those, people just nibbling in your ear and stuff online, and some people find it interesting. I think that ASMR made by machine learning is going to be so compelling that it's going to put all of those, people who make ASMR are completely out of YouTube business very quickly. And in the same way, I think that just about anything social where it's a human-computer interaction, computers have just got so much data available to them, and machine learning is just so powerful that we're going to find that the things that the sort of virtual friends and digital lovers that we tap into are going to get so good at figuring out what it is that floats our boat that we are going to be distracted from everything else. That's a very real possibility, and it's not one that's easy to envision or to put into fiction. But I think that that's whereas I think over the intertubes, there's always going to be something a little bit missing with human stuff, because we're ready to do the whole package and we're doing it together, and we have the same limitations.
Ash, what about you in terms of the psychology behind that intimate bonding?
I was just thinking to what Robert said in terms of it moving into area of fiction. I recently watched the most recent season of The Girlfriend Experience. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that show, but they kind of talk about this idea, right, of how they're going to make this killer algorithm that's just going to be able to get everyone off like all the time, better than any real person would. And it gives you a lot to think about. Watch the show because it's pretty sexy as well. But, you'll kind of be left with a bunch of questions, I guess, which is, if we can program machines and robots to know all of our desires, will that take the place of, human to human interaction? And I guess we don't know. And I guess we won't know until these types of advancements are made and we're pretty much working out in real time how it's playing out. Deep down in my heart of hearts, I feel like, we've evolved. Human beings have evolved over the last, 200,000 years, together as a social species. And I think that we're always going to have some sort of a need to be present and intimate and emotionally connected with other human beings. Lots of people are bringing up these same issues to do with therapy, and psychologists. They're like, hey, are you worried that robot psychologists are going to take your jobs? Well, like, not really. If they could give more people access to services, then I'd say it's a 2 thumbs up for me.
Yeah, apart from Dr. Google, I would not be worried about it, Ash. I think you're all good for your lifetime.
Cool.
I also have another question for you, Ash, from an anonymous attendee. When you face people's criticism for your authenticity, have you ever gotten upset about it? And how do you overcome it and face it with courage?
Oh, do I get upset about it? 100%. Why? Because I'm a human being, and also I'm a massive people pleaser, and I love approval. And and like many of us, there's the things that we're kind of raised on. And so, yeah, it can be really threatening. It can feel really uncomfortable. It can be really upsetting to get criticized. However, I guess the thing we need to learn, and I work with a lot of clients in creative industries, is that, the internet affords us access to such a huge audience now. And that's great for a lot of reasons, because people can find us that might have never found us. However, it's really shit for a lot of reasons, because people can come in and say that we're terrible and that we don't know what we're talking about, or you shouldn't be that way, or there's something wrong with you. And the 3 favorites that people do to try and dig into your sense of self are that you are bad. They'll say you are bad. You are brainwashed. So they'll talk about how you're not autonomous, you're not free to make your own decisions. And the other one is, it's lost from the top of my head at the moment, but you are incompetent, so you're not smart enough to decide for yourself and to make your own choices. So people will go for those soft spots with criticism a lot. I found that that's really helped me. When you see, and if you slide into any comments anywhere, those are the 3 that they'll try to get you at the jugular. It's because it's where we feel vulnerable. Our sense of self feels the most threatened. So I know, seeing you guys nodding, I know that you probably be familiar with these types of comments floating around in pretty much every single comment section everywhere on the internet.
Yeah, I feel like, Jana, you can probably speak to this as well. That's often similar discourses around sex workers, big misconceptions. I'm pretty sure that 90% of the sex workers that I know have degrees coming out their armpits, and are very valid and very intelligent.
Well, how else are we paying for our HEC stats? Like,
yeah,
the real. Yeah.
I also think in order for someone to pay for your time, that you somehow need to be, valid and entertaining and warm and inviting and good. So yeah, Jenna, like being an out sex worker, I guess these are things you experienced. Do you have anything to add to what Ash has said?
I think you smashed it, Ash. Yeah, absolutely. And I get hurt by things that are said because we can't not. But I also think if you want to develop a really strong shell, going into sex work is a really great way to just build up, that strength in yourself. But look, people, I don't know. The way I deal with it is I always remind myself that it's them projecting their own insecurities and all of that. And something like, I just want to acknowledge how huge events like this are, where you have panelists who are academics and experts in their field, and you have a hooker. And that's not devaluing myself. I'm an expert in my field too. And that's, I have that lived experience, and that's really valid. And, as simple as as recently as a few years ago, you probably wouldn't be having a hooker on the panel. And I think that's a huge part of, thank you.
I'd also like to touch on that people who don't engage in sex work, please don't use the term hooker. The general terminology is sex worker, generally accepted. So yeah.
And sorry, Chantal, I'd just like to jump in and say, if there are sex workers on the call and they're looking for sort of mental health support, make sure that you find yourself sex positive psychologists, counselors, psychotherapists. There are a lot of them out there. But, obviously the mental health industry has had quite a sordid and unsavory relationship with things like sex work, with things like sexuality, gender. So making sure that you find the right people to talk to that will validate your experience, that will see you for who you are, and that will help you on your journey is really important.
If anyone also is looking for resources on how to find good practitioners that are safe for sex workers, Ash, if you have any resources, feel free to let them know, but also people from the queer community and also the trans community. There's ACON and Trans Hub, who also work really closely with Scarlet Alliance, which you can reach out to them, and they also have services available as well as sexual health services, and I really encourage people to access that. And if you aren't trans, please go to Trans Hub and learn some trans terminology. But yeah, so my final question for tonight, if no one has any other questions in the chat, is I want to talk about the concept of transhumanism. So it's, for anyone that doesn't know about it, it is a social and philosophical movement that promotes what they call human enhancement. So we've seen these ideas replicated in pop culture in the BBC TV show Years and Years, where one of the characters, Bethany, merges the concept of human and machine. She ends up like uploading her kind of psyche onto the cloud. And then we've also seen this in performance artists like Sterlach, who uses robotic arms and also has a robotic ear in the arm. Do you see a future where transhumanism and cybernetic enhancements is a normal part of a person's sexual experience? And also in Orphan Black. Yeah. Rob, Don, do you want to touch on this? Jenna, sex robots, you could be a sexually enhanced person yourself. Also, what you can also touch on, if we do move into a transhumanism experience, what does this mean for sex robots? Is it a interspecies kind of sexual experience?
Well, isn't it going to be interesting when the sex robots don't just look like one particular tiny little segment of the age, gender, sex, etc., and they aren't catering to another equally tiny little segment. But when those sex robots are something that you've never seen before and never imagined, but that somehow is also able to turn you on or to work with you. And I guess virtual reality is already, in a way, a kind of a transhumanist type of thing. There's no reason that any scene you drop into in virtual reality has to involve humanoids at all. And in fact, you just have to go to the various anime porn to see that it doesn't. And it's not going to, so I'm really, as a scientist, I'm really interested in looking at this proliferation of preferences and sexualities that are going to come out of that. And what happens when people suddenly are able to discover all sorts of things that they were into that they didn't even know how to name. And I think that, the possibility that these technologies, if they are freed and accessible to people, the possibility for that to extend the work of the sexual revolution in just basically making sex not some kind of punitive, confined love and marriage, in a white picket fence type of arrangement, but to just free us up, I think it's going to be absolutely staggering. And of course, the social upheaval will be even bigger than that we've already seen so far in the sexual revolution. But damn, I think it's going to be really interesting, both as a scientist and as a person.
That's really exciting. Don, did you want to touch on this as well?
Sure. I don't know, Ash, have you got anything you want to? I was going to do a bit. So actually, handjob sex robots is actually where the tech is up to. That is available. That is what is being developed. They're basically like little claw hands that will come out and, hold a vibrator or a dildo, or just, touch you or caress you. And to be honest, the thing that Robert's saying, like a lot of the work that's being done in this is actually in trying to develop new ideas about sexuality. So like being held or caressed or touched in various ways might actually be a sexual act with a robot that human beings would be more comfortable with, because it's not replicating something a human would be doing. It's something completely different, but that they would be engaging with. I don't know. It's just an idea. I was also going to just talk about, I got to say, in Orphan Black, the transhumanists, well, there you go, Alana. That's right. Is it just a sex toy, or is it actually a robot? We just use the word robot interchangeably to talk about stuff that looks like robots from movies. In Orphan Black, the transhumanists are actually the bad guys, for what it's worth. Whereas the good guys are a bunch of clones. It's maybe a little bit hard to, draw any particular conclusion from that. But I was just going to make a point about developing sexuality on the back of Robert's comment. And again, this is just from my own research. So one of the things that we see is that Pornhub, I'm just going to do my Pornhub bit, guys. Anyway, so Pornhub actually collects statistics on sexuality all over the world, just the things that people are interested in. And what you can actually see if you look at the statistics is actually the spread of particular specific kinds of sexuality related to things that were traditionally only to be found really in Japan. So we're actually seeing that kind of experience circulating online in terms of how people experience sexuality, which is that we are coming across things that otherwise were very unlikely that we would have experienced, culturally speaking. Different sexual cultures from around the world are intersecting. And you can see this if you look at the 2018 statistics, where they talk about a trending term called Bowset, which is a gender-bent version of Bowser from Mario. And the thing that's most obvious when you look at it is that it's effectively a chimera or a chimera. It's a monster that's coming together from different parts of people's thinking, young people's thinking. That's their gaming life and their sexuality. And it's also a joke. It's basically just it's a meme, right? It's just for the lols, but it's also something they're really looking up and becoming really obsessed with. By the way, just for fun, if you want to know what's happening in human sexuality right now, is people are Googling quarantine pornography and COVID pornography, because they're like, I wonder if this is a thing that's happening to me. It is happening to you, by the way. But so is this other thing, because it is all real life. Bowset is just a way of us talking about all these different sexualities coming together and reshaping as we become more and more aware of people that are different to us because of the internet. Anyway, it's a grand experiment. Sorry, I'm a teacher. I just roll on. I just don't. Like, it'll be 4 hours.
This is great. I could hear you talk about this all day. Well, Jenna, did you want to add?
Yeah, just quickly, it just popped up in my mind. I was just looking at that link, Don, of the very amusing looking handjob robot. It's just a GIF that's been on repeat on my screen the whole time you've been talking. It's been great. I think that there's this other element where we've talked about, the haptic touch and all of that, and what about if a robot or whatever tech gets to the point where it feels like we are touching and we're interacting with another person. And I wonder about the next, because I think that final step we're talking about is if it feels to us like another person is touching us. But I think that there's a further step beyond that, which we get out of sex, which is the impact that we're having on the person that we're with. And I think that some people might be quite surprised to hear that, my clients really care how I feel. They don't want to do activities with me that I don't want to do. I think there's this real perception that as a sex worker, I've just got to, I'm just a vessel that the client uses. And sure, those people exist, of course, but the vast majority of people want the person they're with to be having a good experience too. And that's, look, I'm not the tech expert here by far, so I don't know about how likely it is that we can feel like the robot is consenting, and that we can feel like the robot is getting something out of me, and that I'm having a positive impact on a being. That's, I think, a really crucial part of sex, that an intimacy that to me, I can't imagine that, but I'm not a science dude. You could have feedback. Yeah, I just wonder if we're always going to have in our mind, that's not a person. Yeah, the sexual Turing test. Yeah. I don't know if it's just that mental thing, but maybe I'm just not thinking far ahead enough.
No, that's all great points. I think, we've really kind of opened up a can of worms for things that we could probably go on all night. But we are going to finish up tonight, and I just want to thank everyone who came and our panelists. If anyone attending tonight is looking to explore pornographic alternatives, erotica and things like that, please head to the SEXtember website. We do have a porn and erotica section on our website. And thank you everyone for coming tonight, and please stay safe and continue to practice safe sex and consensual and same sex.